In this example, we want to find the inverse of the function f of x equals 5 minus 3 times 2x plus 1 to the fifth power. So what we're going to do is just first rewrite the function here, and then the very first thing you want to do is just to replace f of x by y. The reason for that is pretty simple. You just want to do some work with the functions. It's just easier to deal with it when you have y written there instead of f of x. So, a lot of times you just kind of interpret those as being the same thing, and that's true, but it's just a little easier to solve, which is what we're going to do next, when there's a y there as opposed to writing 4 symbols instead of 1. So what we want to do here is, now that we've replaced f of x by y, is we want to solve for x. There is a different way to go about doing this kind of problem, and that is to switch the x and the y first. And for this problem, it doesn't really matter which way you do it, but there are some problems where I think one way is easier than the other, so that's kind of why I do it the way I do it here. But if you want to do it the other way, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is to solve for x first. So looking at what we've got here, we have x inside this fifth power, negative 3, and then this 5 out here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to subtract 5 from both sides and carry this 5 over there. So subtract 5 from both sides, and when I do that, I get y minus 5 equals negative 3 times 2x plus 1 to the fifth power. Okay, so now what we've got in here negative 3 times this quantity where the x is. So what I'm going to do now is to divide both sides and move that negative 3 over here. So I'm slowly getting the x by itself on one side, so divide both sides by a negative 3, and I wind up with this quantity right here. So if we're just finding the inverse, and that's all you really want to do, then these next steps are not totally necessary. But one thing is that if you're taking a multiple choice test or something like that, they probably would not leave this negative with the 3 right here. They'd probably rearrange this to look a little bit different in the answer. So again, this is not totally necessary. If all we want to do is to find the inverse, it's just that it's not likely that negative would be left down there. So this is really just a matter of style as opposed to anything else, but it would be important if you're taking a multiple choice test. So what I'm going to do is, we have this negative sign out here, and if you remember, if you've got a fraction and this number in the bottom is negative, or in the top for that matter, there's 3 places you can take this negative. You can take it in the bottom here, you could put it out front, or you could carry it up to the top. And that's what I'm going to do in this case. I'm going to take that negative and put it up in the top with the y minus 5 right there. Next, then, I'm just going to distribute that negative through the parentheses there. So I'm going to take this negative to the y, and to the negative 5 here I get negative y plus 5, and so that looks a little bit better with just the positive 3 there. And then probably you might see it written the other way instead of the minus being out in front. You could rearrange the order of these two things because it doesn't matter what order you add them in. So I just rearrange the order to get the negative here. And then 5 plus negative y can be written a little more simply as 5 minus y. So again, it's a matter of style here. If you were just finding the inverse, it's not really necessary to do this, but on a multiple choice test or something like that, you might see any of those combinations, I guess, but it seems a little bit more likely maybe that you might see it written like this. So again, all that stuff there you might not have to do in some other problem, but in this one, you might see it rewritten in a number of ways like that. Okay, so we are a little bit closer to solving for x. We've isolated this fifth power over here on the other side, and the x is in there, so we want to sort of undo that. how we would undo that is take the fifth root of both sides of the equation. Okay, and so that's just what we did in that step there. And one thing to notice, right, we're taking the fifth root of both these expressions right here, so we won't have any issues about taking the even root of a negative number in there. There's some considerations that you would have to make if that were a square root or fourth root or sixth root. But because this is odd, an odd indexed root here, we don't really have to worry about that situation since it's odd. So alright, so that's what we would have. And just simplifying over on this side over here, right, we have the fifth root of a fifth power, so those would undo each other and leave us with just the 2x plus 1 over here. Over on this side, just sort of going to leave it as that. So, alright, so we're a little bit closer to solving for x. We have this plus 1, so we're going to subtract 1 from both sides. Okay, and so now over here on the right hand side we're left with just 2x. Can't really combine this or make it any nicer than it is there, so just going to leave it that way. And then now all we would have to do to solve for x is to divide both sides by 2. I'm going to just multiply by a half on both sides, which is equivalent to that. It'll look a little nicer. So I'm going to multiply both sides by a half. And then over here on the right hand side I have 1/2 times 2x. That will cancel each other out. Or the 2 and the 1/2 will multiply to 1. And so now I wind up with just x over here on one side. So I've solved for x, which is what I wanted to do there. Okay. Alright, so once you solve for x, what you want to do is, after that, is to replace x and y by each other. So in other words, everywhere there's an x up here, you'll replace it by y. Everywhere there's a y, you'll replace it by x. Okay, and so that is the inverse function there, literally. And usually the very last thing you would do, since we're talking about function notation here, is to replace y by f inverse x. Okay, so that lets you know, hey, the function f that I started off with, this is its inverse function. And so this part over here didn't really change from the last step. All we're doing in that last step is replacing y by f inverse x. So this would be the inverse of f.